My daughter-in-law secretly married my dying husband in the hospital, while he was connected to a heart monitor. I found out when I walked into the ICU carrying a paper cup of soup and saw a minister standing beside his bed. My son Ryan was holding a pen. My husband Thomas could barely keep his eyes open. And Sabrina, my daughter-in-law, was standing there in a cream-colored dress, smiling like she had just won something. She looked at me and said, "Thomas wanted me protected after he passed. Protected from me. I had been his wife for 42 years. I had slept in hospital chairs for 7 weeks. I had held his hand through every painful breath, every test result, every doctor's quiet warning. And now this woman, who had married my son 6 years earlier, was calling herself Thomas's wife. Ryan wouldn't look at me. That hurt worse than Sabrina's smile. I stepped closer to the bed and looked at the marriage certificate. Thomas's signature was there, thin and shaky, dragged across the paper like someone had guided his hand. I whispered, "Thomas?" His eyes moved toward me for half a second. There was confusion in them. Then fear. Then the machines beeped louder, and he slipped back into that cloudy silence. Sabrina touched the document with 2 fingers. "It's already done, Margaret. Already done." Like I was late to my own life. I did not scream. I did not slap her. I did not beg my son to remember who raised him. I just looked at that paper, then at Ryan, then at Sabrina, and I smiled. Because in that moment, through the shock, the humiliation, and the grief, one thought became perfectly clear. They thought I was broken. They thought an old woman with a dying husband would be too tired to fight. They thought grief had made me weak. That was their first mistake. 48 hours before that hospital wedding, I still believed Sabrina was simply being helpful. That is the humiliating part. I had ignored so many signs because I wanted peace in my family. Thomas had been sick for months, but the final decline came fast. One week he was sitting at our kitchen table, drinking black coffee, complaining about the price of eggs. The next, he was in a hospital bed, with tubes in his arms and doctors saying words like advanced heart failure and limited options. The ICU became my home. I knew which vending machine swallowed quarters. I knew which nurse made decent coffee. I knew the exact sound Thomas made when pain medication pulled him halfway under. Sabrina started visiting more often during the final week. At first, I appreciated it. She brought Ryan clean shirts. She brought expensive food from restaurants I never would have chosen. She spoke to doctors with a confidence that made me feel old and slow. But then I noticed things. She would step between me and the doctor. She would answer questions meant for me. She would say, "We're handling that," when nobody had asked her to handle anything. One afternoon, I returned from the restroom and found Sabrina holding Thomas's medical file. When she saw me, she closed it quickly. "Oh," she said, smiling too brightly. "I was just helping Ryan understand the situation." Ryan stood beside her with his hands in his pockets. He looked nervous. I asked, "What situation?" Sabrina's smile sharpened. "Your future, Margaret." The way she said it made the room feel colder. That night, I heard her whispering to Ryan near the elevator. "We don't have much time." Ryan said, "This feels wrong." Sabrina snapped. "What's wrong is letting your mother control everything after he's gone." I stepped back before they saw me. My hands were trembling. Control everything. I had never controlled anything. I had spent my whole life smoothing things over, making dinners, remembering birthdays, sending checks when Ryan needed help, pretending not to notice when Sabrina rolled her eyes at my stories. And still, somehow, I had become the enemy. That night, Thomas woke for a few minutes and squeezed my fingers. His voice was barely air. "Don't let them fight." I leaned closer. "Who, sweetheart?" His eyes filled with tears. "Ryan?" "And her." Then he looked toward the door. Not at me. At the door. As if he was afraid someone might be listening. Before I could ask what he meant, Sabrina walked in holding 2 coffees. She looked at our joined hands. Then she smiled. And for the first time, I saw it clearly. She was not visiting my husband. She was guarding him. Nurse Helen Brooks was the first person brave enough to say what everyone else was pretending not to see. She was in her late 60s, with silver hair pulled into a tight bun and eyes that missed nothing. She had worked in that hospital for 31 years, and she had the calm, tired kindness of someone who had watched too many families fall apart under fluorescent lights. That evening, after Sabrina asked me to give them privacy again, Helen found me sitting beside the ice machine. I was holding an untouched cup of coffee. She sat down beside me and lowered her voice. Mrs. Whitmore. I probably shouldn't say this. My body went still. She looked toward Thomas's room. But I think something inappropriate is happening. The word inappropriate sounded too small, like calling a house fire a little smoke. I asked, "What do you mean?" Helen took a breath. Last night, a notary came in after visiting hours. Sabrina signed him in as family. My throat tightened. A notary? Helen nodded. And this morning, she asked Dr. Keller whether Thomas could be considered mentally competent to sign legal paperwork. I stared at her. The hallway lights seemed too bright. What paperwork? Helen's mouth pressed into a thin line. I don't know. But Ryan signed something too. Ryan. My son. The boy I had held through ear infections and heartbreaks. The man who now stood beside his wife, while she circled his dying father like a banker circling property. I whispered. Did Thomas understand? Helen looked away. That answer was enough. She said softly. He has moments of clarity. But he's heavily medicated, Margaret. Some days he thinks it's 1998. I closed my eyes. The year Ryan graduated high school. The year Thomas and I refinished the porch ourselves, because money's was tight. The year Sabrina was still a stranger somewhere. Not yet inside my family. Not yet inside my marriage. Not yet standing near my husband's bed, with legal documents. Helen touched on my hand. I've seen families do cruel things around money. But this feels planned. Planned. The word landed inside me like a stone. I wanted to run into that room and demand answers. I wanted to grab Ryan by the shoulders and ask him when he stopped being my son. But Helen looked at me with quiet urgency. Be careful. People like that expect anger. They use it against you. People like that. Until that moment, I had still been thinking of Sabrina as family. Difficult family. Cold family. But family, now, I understood. She had never joined our family. She had infiltrated it. And when I stood up from that bench, I was not the same woman who had sat down. Once suspicion enters your heart, memories change shape. Things you excused become evidence. Things you forgave become warnings. That night, sitting in my car in the hospital parking lot, I started remembering everything I had forced myself to ignore. Sabrina had asked about the ranch 3 months after marrying Ryan. Not in a curious way, in a measuring way. So this land has been in Thomas's family for generations? She asked during Sunday dinner. Thomas smiled proudly. Since my grandfather. Sabrina looked out the window at the pastures. Must be worth a fortune now. I laughed politely at the time. Thomas didn't. Later she asked where we kept important documents. I told myself she was organized. She asked whether Thomas had life insurance. I told myself she was practical. She asked if our trust was revocable or irrevocable. That one should have stopped me cold. But Sabrina had a way of making invasive questions sound responsible. I just worry about Ryan, she would say. Or, I want to make sure your wishes are respected. Or, my personal favorite. Margaret, you know I see you as a second mother. She never did. She saw me as a locked door. And she spent 6 years looking for the key. Ryan changed slowly under her influence. That was the cruelest part. He didn't become cold overnight. He simply stopped calling as much. Then he stopped stopping by alone. Then every conversation began to include Sabrina's opinion. Mom, Sabrina thinks. Mom, Sabrina says. Mom, Sabrina feels. Eventually, my son's voice became an echo of hers. Thomas noticed it too. One evening, after Ryan canceled dinner for the third time, Thomas stood at the kitchen sink for a long while, washing the same plate over and over. I asked, "Are you all right?" He said, "I don't know where my boy went. I should have listened harder." A month before Thomas was hospitalized, Sabrina showed up at our house with Ryan and a folder. She said she wanted to adult help simplify things. Inside were forms about account access, emergency contacts, and medical authorizations. Thomas pushed the folder away.
I have Margaret for that.
Sabrina smiled, but her eyes went flat. Of course, but Margaret is 70. What if something happens to both of you? I remember the silence after that. Not concern, not love, a calculation. That night, Thomas told me, "Don't sign anything Sabrina brings." I laughed nervously. Why would I? He looked at me then, really looked at me. Promise me. I promised, but I didn't ask why. And now, in that hospital parking lot, with rain tapping against my windshield, I realized Thomas had known. Maybe not everything, but enough. My husband had tried to warn me, and I had been too desperate for family peace to hear him. The next morning, I arrived at the ICU earlier than usual. I had slept badly in the hospital chapel, my coat folded under my head, my purse clutched against my chest. At 5:40 a.m., I washed my face in the restroom and looked at my reflection. I looked older than 70, not because of wrinkles, because betrayal ages you faster than time ever could. When I reached Thomas's room, Sabrina was already there. That alone felt wrong. She hated mornings. But there she was, standing beside his bed in a cream dress, with her hair curled and makeup perfect. A minister stood near the monitors. A man with a leather briefcase stood at the foot of the bed. Ryan stood by the window, pale as paper. Thomas was lying back against the pillows, eyes half open, breathing through an oxygen mask. My first thought was simple. No. Just no. The minister was speaking softly. In sickness and in health. I stepped into the room. What is this? Everyone turned. Sabrina's face flickered with irritation before smoothing into fake sympathy. Margaret, please don't make this ugly. Ugly. She was marrying my dying husband in an ICU, and I was the one making it ugly. I looked at Ryan. Stop this. He swallowed. Mom, stop this right now. Sabrina cut in. Thomas asked for this. I walked to the bed. Thomas, sweetheart, did you ask for this? His eyes moved toward me. For one fragile second, I thought he might speak. Then Sabrina leaned close to him and said loudly, Thomas, remember what we discussed. You wanted me protected. His face tightened. He looked confused. The man with the briefcase placed a pen in Thomas's hand. I watched Sabrina wrap her fingers around his wrist. Not his hand, his wrist. She guided the pen. The line on the paper shook violently. I heard myself whisper, Ryan! My son's eyes filled with tears, but he did nothing. Nothing. And sometimes nothing is the cruelest thing a child can do. When the paper was signed, Sabrina exhaled like she had been holding her breath for years. The minister looked uncomfortable. The notary avoided my eyes. Sabrina turned the document toward me. There. Now we can all stop worrying. I looked at the signature, then at my husband, then at my son. Something inside me went very quiet. Not numb, not empty. Quiet, the kind of quiet that comes before a storm. I picked up my purse. Sabrina smirked. That's it. You're leaving? I looked at her and said, for now. Her smile faded just a little. Good. She heard it. The difference between surrender and patience. As I walked out, Ryan followed me into the hallway. Mom, please understand. I turned so fast he stopped speaking. No, Ryan. One day, you're going to understand. His face crumpled. But still, he went back into that room. And I walked to the nurse's station with one question in my mind. Who had allowed this to happen? Thomas died 2 days later. It was raining that morning. A soft, steady rain that blurred the hospital windows and made the whole world look unfinished. He passed just after 6 a.m. I was holding his left hand. Sabrina was holding his right. That alone felt like a final insult, but I said nothing. Thomas opened his eyes once near the end. He looked at me. Only me. His mouth moved behind the oxygen mask. I leaned close. "I'm here," I whispered. "I'm right here." His fingers pressed mine with surprising strength. Then he whispered one word. "Sorry." My heart broke in a way I still cannot fully explain. Sorry. Not goodbye. Not, "I love you." Sorry. Because somewhere inside that failing body, beneath the medication and confusion and fear, Thomas knew. He knew what had been done. The monitor changed. The room filled with sudden movement. Nurses came in. Sabrina began sobbing loudly. Too loudly. Ryan stood frozen near the wall. I stayed still, holding the hand of the man I had loved since I was 26 years old, while machines confirmed what my heart already knew. Thomas was gone. The funeral happened 3 days later. Sabrina wore black lace and received condolences like a widow in a movie. People whispered. Some looked confused. A few old friends approached me carefully, unsure what title belonged to me now. I could see the question in their eyes. Was I the widow? Was Sabrina? Was I just the first wife now? 42 years reduced to awkward silence at a funeral guest book. After the service, Ryan drove Sabrina home. Not me. I took a cab. When I reached the ranch house, my key did not work. At first, I thought my hands were shaking too badly. I tried again. Nothing. Then I saw my suitcases on the porch. 3 of them. My blue suitcase from our trip to Colorado, a brown duffel bag, and a cardboard box with my framed photos stacked inside like donations. I stood there in the rain, staring. The front door opened. Sabrina appeared wearing one of my sweaters, mine, cream cashmere. Thomas bought it for me on our 30th anniversary. She folded her arms. I thought it would be easier if we packed for you. Ryan stood behind her. My son, my only child. He looked smaller than I had ever seen him. I said, "You changed the locks?" Sabrina's voice was smooth. "This house belongs to Thomas's wife now." There it was. The sentence she had been waiting to say. I looked at Ryan. "Is that what you believe?" He opened his mouth. Sabrina answered for him. "It's what the paperwork says." Ryan looked at the floor. Again. Always the floor. The rain ran down my face. For a moment, I let them think it was tears. Then I picked up the cardboard box. Sabrina smiled. "Don't worry. We'll send whatever else we find. Whatever else." Like my life was clutter. I walked down those porch steps without raising my voice. But when I reached the driveway, I turned back once. Sabrina was still watching me. Ryan had disappeared inside, and I thought, "You have no idea what you just stole from yourself." I spent that night in a roadside motel 6 miles from the ranch. Room 14. A flickering sign outside. Thin towels. A heater that rattled like it was full of loose screws. I sat on the edge of the bed with my wet suitcase open, staring at the few things Sabrina had decided I deserved. 3 sweaters. 2 pairs of pants. My medication. A framed photo of Ryan at age 7, missing 1 front tooth, and Thomas's old Bible. That was the one thing that made me cry. Not the house, not the locks, the Bible. Inside the front cover, Thomas had written my name in blue ink 39 years earlier. To Margaret, the only home I ever needed. I pressed that page to my chest and finally let myself break. Not loudly, just enough. By morning, I was done crying. At 8:03 a.m., I called Gregory Hale. Gregory had been our family attorney for nearly 25 years. He had handled the purchase of the ranch, Thomas's business restructuring, our estate plan, and every contract Thomas refused to read because he trusted Gregory more than fine print. His secretary answered. When I said my name, her voice changed. "Mrs. Whitmore, Mr. Hale has been trying to reach you." That sentence made my blood slow. Trying to reach me? I drove to his office wearing yesterday's clothes. Gregory met me in the lobby himself. He was in his 70s, tall, with tired eyes, and the kind of face that had seen too many families become animals over money. He closed his office door behind us. Then he said, "Margaret, I need you to tell me exactly what happened at the hospital." So I did. I told him about Sabrina, the minister, the notary, the signature, the locks, the suitcases. Gregory listened without interrupting. When I finished, he removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. Then he said, "That marriage will not survive a challenge." I stared at him. "What?" He opened a file. Thomas executed most of his estate planning 12 years ago. The ranch, the investment accounts, and controlling shares of Whitmore Agricultural Supply were placed into an irrevocable trust. I could barely breathe. Meaning Thomas did not personally own those assets anymore. I leaned forward. Gregory looked directly at me. "You are the primary trustee, Margaret, and the protected beneficiary." For several seconds, I heard nothing. Not the traffic outside, not the clock, not my own breathing. Sabrina had thrown me out of a house she did not own. She had married a dying man for assets he no longer controlled. She had humiliated me publicly for a crown made of smoke. Gregory slid another paper across the desk. "There is more." My stomach tightened. Of course there was. He tapped the page. 3 weeks ago, someone attempted to change trust access through a forged authorization. I looked down. The signature was mine, but I had never signed it. Gregory's voice lowered. "Margaret, this wasn't just manipulation." He paused. "This may be fraud." And for the first time since Thomas died, I smiled for real. Not with joy, with clarity. Gregory asked quietly, "Do you want revenge?" I looked at the forged signature. Then I thought of my suitcases in the rain. Ryan's lowered eyes, Sabrina wearing my sweater, and Thomas whispering sorry. "No," I said. "I want consequences." For the next 2 weeks, I let Sabrina believe she had won. That was the hardest part. Not because I wanted to scream, because I wanted to watch. Gregory told me patience mattered. People like Sabrina reveal themselves when they feel safe. He said. He was right. Sabrina felt very safe. She posted a photo of herself on the ranch porch 3 days after Thomas's funeral. The caption read, "Starting over in peace. Peace." She was standing in front of the house. Thomas and I had painted ourselves one summer when Ryan was 12. The shutters were green because Thomas said. Blue made the house look sad. Sabrina changed them to black within a week. Then came the new Mercedes. Then the kitchen remodel. Then the Instagram story of her holding a glass of champagne in my dining room. My dining room. The table behind her was the same one where I had hosted Thanksgiving for 38 years. She had replaced my lace curtains with gray designer panels. She had moved my family photos. And on the mantel, where Thomas kept our wedding picture, Sabrina placed a framed photo of herself and Ryan. Ryan, my son, had quit his job. Gregory found out through a financial contact. Apparently, Ryan told friends he was stepping back to manage family assets. Family assets. He couldn't even manage his own marriage. But Sabrina was spending faster than reality could catch her. Contractors called Gregory's office, asking why payments were being declined. A dealership called about title documents. A bank requested verification for a line of credit Sabrina had tried to open using the ranch address. Each time, Gregory documented everything. Each time, I said nothing. Then Sabrina called me. I almost didn't answer. But Gregory had told me, let her talk. Don't threaten. Don't explain. Let arrogance become evidence. So I answered. Her voice was syrupy sweet. Margaret, I hope you're settling in somewhere comfortable. I looked around my tiny rented apartment. 1 bedroom, peeling paint near the window, a folding table for meals. I'm managing. She laughed softly. I'm glad. Ryan worries about you. That almost made me angry. Not because it was true. Because it wasn't. Then she said, "There are still some things at the house. Mostly old clothes and kitchen items. I can donate them if you don't want them." Old clothes, kitchen items, my life. I said, "Keep whatever helps you sleep." Silence. Then her tone changed. "You know, Margaret, bitterness is not healthy at your age. At your age." There it was. The little blade she always hid inside polite words. I smiled into the phone. "You're right, Sabrina. Stress can be dangerous." She didn't understand. Not yet. The next morning, Gregory filed the first petition. By lunchtime, Sabrina's bank access was frozen. By dinner, her contractor walked off the ranch job. And at 9:17 p.m., Ryan called me for the first since the funeral. His voice was shaking. "Mom, what did you do?" I looked at Thomas's Bible on my small kitchen table. Then I said, "I stopped being polite." Ryan came to my apartment the next morning. Not alone. Sabrina was with him. She wore sunglasses, even though it was cloudy, and walked into my building like the hallway offended her. Ryan looked exhausted, unshaven, ashamed, but still beside her. That told me everything. I opened the door but did not invite them in. Sabrina removed her sunglasses slowly. "We need to talk," I said, "then talk." Her jaw tightened. Ryan looked between us. "Mom, the accounts are frozen. The contractors are threatening legal action. Sabrina says Gregory is blocking everything." "Sabrina says a lot of things." Sabrina stepped forward. "That house is mine." "No," I said calmly. "It isn't." Her face changed just slightly, but enough. Ryan frowned. "What do you mean?" I looked at my son. For the first time, I saw genuine confusion. Not cruelty. Not indifference. Confusion. That made me sadder somehow. Because it meant Sabrina had not just used him. She had trained him. "Your father placed the ranch and business assets into an irrevocable trust 12 years ago," I said. "I am the trustee." Ryan blinked. Sabrina snapped, "That's not true." I looked at her. "You already knew it was true. That's why you tried to forge my authorization." Ryan turned toward her. "What?" Sabrina laughed once. A sharp, ugly sound. "She's desperate, Ryan." I reached behind me and picked up the copy Gregory had given me. I handed it to Ryan. He stared at the signature. His face drained. "That's Mom's name." "Yes," I said, "but not my signature." Sabrina grabbed his arm. "Ryan, don't let her manipulate you." I almost smiled. Manipulate. The thief accusing the locked door. Ryan looked at her. "Sabrina, did you sign this?" She pulled back as if he had slapped her. "How dare you ask me that after everything I've done for this family?" That was her pattern. Accusation became injury. Questions became betrayal. Truth became attack. Ryan's voice cracked. "Did you?" Sabrina's eyes flashed. "I did what had to be done because your mother was going to leave us with nothing. Us. There it was. Not Thomas. Not love. Us." Ryan stepped away from her. For the first time in years, he stepped away from her. Sabrina saw it too. Her face twisted. "You ungrateful coward." Ryan flinched. I had seen that flinch before. At dinners, on phone calls, in the hospital. I had mistaken it for stress. It was fear. Sabrina turned on me. "You think you've won because some old lawyer scared a bank?" "Thomas married me. He chose me." My voice stayed quiet. "No, Sabrina. You chose a medicated man who couldn't remember what year it was." Her eyes went cold. "You can't prove that." I looked at her for a long moment. Then I said, "Nurse Helen can." For the first time since I had known her, Sabrina looked truly afraid, and Ryan saw it. That was the beginning of the end. The hearing took place 6 weeks later. By then, Sabrina had stopped posting online. The Mercedes had been returned. The contractors had filed claims. The remodel sat unfinished, with plastic sheets hanging in the kitchen where my curtains used to be. I wore a navy dress. Thomas had always liked, not because I wanted to look strong, because I needed to feel remembered. Gregory sat beside me with 3 folders stacked neatly in front of him. Sabrina arrived 10 minutes late. She wore black, like a grieving widow again. Ryan came in separately. That mattered. He sat behind me, not beside her. I did not turn around. I was not ready to forgive him, just because he finally noticed the fire after helping light the match. The judge reviewed the petition challenging the validity of the ICU marriage, the attempted trust access, and the disputed medical competency statement. Sabrina cried first. Of course she did. She dabbed her eyes with the tissue and said, I love Thomas. Margaret never accepted that. Loved him. She used his first name with such false tenderness that my stomach turned. Gregory stood. Your Honor, we have hospital medication records showing Mr. Whitmore was administered significant pain medication within 90 minutes of signing the marriage certificate. Sabrina's attorney objected. The judge allowed Gregory to continue. Then came Nurse Helen. She walked to the witness chair in her pale blue cardigan, steady as stone. She described Thomas's confusion, his fluctuating awareness, Sabrina's repeated requests for privacy, the after-hours notary, the way Sabrina guided Thomas's wrist during the signature. Sabrina stared at the table. Ryan stared at the floor. But this time, the floor could not protect him. Then Gregory played the hospital hallway footage. No sound, just images. Sabrina rushing a notary inside. Ryan looking around nervously. The minister arriving. Me entering later with the soup cup in my hand. And then, inside the partial room camera angle, Thomas's hand shaking as Sabrina held his wrist. The courtroom went silent. Not quiet. Silent. The kind of silence where nobody wants to breathe too loudly because the truth has become visible. The judge leaned back. Sabrina whispered something to her attorney. Her attorney did not answer. Then Gregory presented the forged authorization. A handwriting expert had reviewed it. But my signature had been copied from an old Christmas card. A Christmas card. I remembered it immediately. To Sabrina and Ryan, with love, Mom. With love. She had used my love as a template for theft. That broke something open in me. Not sadness. Rage. Clean, cold rage. The judge's voice was firm. The court finds sufficient cause to suspend recognition of the marriage pending further investigation. Trust assets remain frozen. The alleged authorization is referred for further review. Sabrina made us sound like the air had been knocked out of her. Ryan covered his face. I sat perfectly still. Then Sabrina turned toward me, eyes burning. You did this. I looked at her for the first time that day. No, I said, you did. Ryan came to see me 3 days after the hearing. This time he came alone. I watched from my apartment windows as he sat in his car for nearly 20 minutes before getting out. When I opened the door, he looked like a man who had aged 10 years in a month. Mom, he said, just that. One word. And for a second, I saw the little boy who used to run into the kitchen after school, holding drawings he wanted taped to the fridge. But then I saw the man who stood in the ICU while Sabrina guided his father's hand. Both were my son.
That was the hardest part.
He stepped inside and looked around my small apartment. His eyes moved over the folding table, the thrift store lamp, the cardboard boxes I still hadn't unpacked. Shame spread across his face. I didn't know it was this bad. I laughed softly. Not kindly. You didn't ask. He closed his eyes. That landed. Good. Some truths should hurt. He sat at the table and stared at Thomas's Bible. Did Dad really say sorry? I nodded. Ryan's face crumpled. He covered his mouth. But the sob came anyway. I destroyed our family. I said nothing, because apologies, spoken too soon, can become another performance. He cried harder. Sabrina told me you were trying to cut me out. She said Dad was scared you'd leave everything to charity. She said you never trusted me. I looked at him. And you believed her. He wiped his face. I don't know why. Yes, you do. He looked up. I kept my voice steady. Because believing her was easier than defending me. That hurt him. I saw it. But I did not take it back. I had spent too many years softening truths so others could swallow them. I was done doing that, Ryan whispered. I'm sorry. I folded my hands. When you were 9, you had pneumonia. Your father was on a work trip, and I stayed awake for 3 nights, checking your fever every hour. His face twisted. When you were 17 and wrecked your truck, I told your father I dented the garage door so he wouldn't punish you before finals. Mom, when college tuition went up, I sold my mother's ring. You never knew because I didn't want you to feel guilty. He was crying openly now. And when Sabrina started pushing me out, I kept smiling because I thought if I made peace with her, I could keep you. My voice finally cracked. But I lost you anyway. Ryan reached for my hand. I let him take it. But I did not squeeze back. Not yet, he whispered. Can you forgive me? I looked at my son, my broken, foolish, manipulated son. And I told him the truth. Some maybe. But not because you cried. He nodded slowly. I'll testify. That surprised me. He swallowed. I'll tell them everything. The papers, the conversations, the pressure, all of it. For the first time, I squeezed his hand. Not forgiveness, but recognition. A beginning. Then his phone buzzed. Sabrina's name lit up the screen. He looked at it, then turned the phone off. And somewhere inside me, something unclenched. The full confrontation happened at the ranch. Not in court. Not in Gregory's office. At the house. My house. The criminal investigation was moving forward. Sabrina was not arrested that day, but she had been formally questioned about the forged authorization, the hospital notary, and several financial applications she had submitted under false assumptions of ownership. Her world had become very small. No Mercedes, no remodel, no online applause, no husband willing to hide behind her. Ryan had moved into an extended stay hotel. The ranch was legally secured under the trust. And Gregory arranged for me to return with a sheriff's deputy present, while Sabrina removed her belongings. When I walked up the porch steps, my knees trembled, not from fear, from memory. Thomas had built that porch swing with Ryan one summer. I had planted lavender by the steps. I had kissed my husband under that porch light more times than I could count. Sabrina opened the door before I knocked. She looked thinner, angrier, still beautiful, but sharp around the edges. Now, like greed had finally started showing through her skin. You must be enjoying this, she said. I stepped inside. The house smelled wrong. Paint, dust, perfume, not home. Not enjoying, I said. Finishing. She laughed bitterly. You think you're better than me, because you waited longer to take everything. I turned to her. I didn't take everything, Sabrina. I protected what was already mine. Her face hardened. You old women always do this. You cling to houses, money, dead men, and call it love. There it was, the real Sabrina. No softness, no performance, just contempt. I walked to the mantel. Our wedding photo was gone. I found it in a box near the fireplace, face down. I picked it up and wiped dust from the glass. Thomas and I were 26 in that picture, young, poor, hopeful, completely unaware that one day, a woman not yet born into our lives would try to erase us. I placed the photo back on the mantel. Sabrina watched me with hatred. He chose me at the end. I looked at her. No. At the end, he apologized to me. Her face flickered. That one hurt her. Good. The sheriff's deputy cleared his throat from the doorway. Mom, you need to finish collecting your things. Sabrina grabbed her purse. At the door, she turned back to Ryan, who had arrived quietly and stood near the hallway. Ryan, tell her. Tell her this isn't over. Ryan looked at her for a long time. Then he said, It's over. Sabrina's mouth opened. Nothing came out. For once, she had no script, no tears, no accusation sharp enough to cut her way out. Just silence. She left with 2 suitcases. Far less than what she had put outside for me. Karma has a sense of proportion. Months passed. The marriage was voided. The forged documents became part of a formal fraud case. Sabrina took a plea agreement before trial, because the evidence was too strong and Ryan's testimony sealed what she had tried to deny. She lost access to everything she had schemed for. And I returned to the ranch. The first thing I did was replant the garden Thomas loved, lavender by the porch, tomatoes near the fence, roses along the path. Ryan came every Saturday to help. We did not pretend everything was healed. Real wounds don't close because someone says sorry. But he showed up, week after week. Quietly, consistently. And sometimes, that is the only apology that matters. One afternoon, while we were planting rosemary, Ryan said, "Dad would have liked this." I looked toward the porch. The swing moved slightly in the wind. "Yes," I said, "he would have." Then I added, "But he would have hated what we had to survive to get here." Ryan nodded. His eyes filled, but he didn't look away this time. That mattered. At sunset, I stood alone on the porch with Thomas's Bible in my hands. The house was quiet again, but not empty. Not anymore. I had lost my husband. I had nearly lost my son. I had been humiliated, replaced, thrown out, and underestimated. But I was still standing, and that is what women my age know better than anyone. People mistake our silence for weakness. They mistake our patience for surrender. They mistake our age for helplessness. But we have survived marriages, childbirth, grief, betrayal, unpaid bills, family secrets, and nights so painful we didn't know if morning would come. So when Sabrina thought an old woman would break quietly, she forgot something important. Women like me do not break quietly. We remember everything. And when the time comes, we sign the right paper. I don't believe revenge heals the heart. But I do believe the truth can return your dignity. Sometimes family betrayal does not come with shouting. Sometimes it comes wearing a smile, holding paperwork, and calling itself love. I learned that peace is not keeping everyone comfortable. Peace is finally refusing to disappear.